Alrighty, everyone. Hopefully you've managed to have some pizza and something to drink. And I really appreciate everyone backing the traffic and making it out here. It's a great turnout. I think that's indicative of a really topical conversation we're going to have tonight. The venue we were at tonight, this venue is a beautiful spot. We have lots of space. It's nice and open. And for that, we have to thank the guys from Data Science. They're hosting us. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I run the meetup, and I also work for CorpInfo. And CorpInfo is a premier consulting partner. Tonight, CorpInfo is sponsoring your beer and pizza. So thank you to CorpInfo. We do have surveys, questions that are not going to make you think too hard, but really just trying to understand what it is you want to learn about, what other topics are near and dear to you, ideas and topics for future meetups. So if you can fill those out, we greatly appreciate it. We may have some goodies for those who do fill it out. And I think with that, we're going to get started. So I'm going to hand off to Neeraj.
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Colin. This is a great turnout. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Neeraj Verma. I'm a solutions architect with AWS. Been here about 2 years now. I see some of my customers actually in the audience, so that's great. Hey, Richard. So yeah, thrilled to be here. We're going to be talking about security today in terms of the traceability and the visibility into the AWS environment. So yeah, I hope to show you some tools, native tools built within the AWS ecosystem natively. So hopefully you can get something out of it and start using it if you're not already. So with that, let me just get onto it. So as many of you probably already know, security is really foundational for us, on which we built all AWS services. When it's a zero at AWS, and we really take it, that way because we are kind of asked to meet the bar for some of the most stringent and security-sensitive customers, right? And I think with that mindset, we have built a platform that has allowed us to kind of cater to those customers, and they keep driving us to build more and more services and more features in the Amazon way, which is they want to get started easily, they want to do it more cost effectively, they want to use it pay-as-you-go fashion. So I just want to bring this slide up, which shows the pace of innovation, again driven by customer feedback as the features they are asking us to build. And this shows until 2014, as you see that pace. We're not slowing down. In 2015, it doesn't show. We released over 722 significant features/services for our customers. And this year, until end of April, we're already 330 services. So I'm hoping that we'll break that record this year as well. What I want to show this slide is the darker part. Those are the features somehow related to security, whether it is auditing, access control, encryption, you name it, right? So significant set of those features are related to security. So I want to show you here that when you come to AWS, right, you get the benefit of 1 million plus customers, active customers that are giving us feedback on our features and services and asking us to build services. So you get the benefit of the bar that is being raised every day, right? We're iterating on the services we build. Like, you would know the encryption when we started earlier, we started with server side, then we went on to the client side keys. We released the KMS, a managed key management offering, right? So we keep on iterating. You also benefit from the 30 or odd independent certification and accreditations we maintain and we go through, again, to help our customers, reduce their compliance burden. Because when we manage our infrastructure, right, with a large set of security professionals and 24/7 monitoring, that is taking cut away from your compliance scope, right? So you don't have to deal with those controls, and you can focus on the controls on top layer on the application side, and kind of focusing on the functionality, right? So I'm going to move on from here. So quintessential slide. You see that in every security presentation. So security is a shared responsibility model in AWS. We take care of the lower part, the global infrastructure, our data center, the physical controls, monitoring of the underlying platform so that nothing nefarious is going on, right? Catching bad players, maintaining the compliance on those areas so you don't have to. And you're responsible for managing the security controls on the top layer, which is on the, whether it's configuring the network right way, configuring the instances right way, still kind of focusing on the application side of things and not, leaving open things out. So with those kind of things I talked about, right, it's really in the AWS side of things, when you come to this, right, from enterprise traditional world of IT, where a lot of stuff is physical. I spent a lot of time as a security engineer, security architect in my past jobs, at large enterprise companies. And I've seen security is really slow in many ways, right? And it's hard also because lack of visibility, right? You don't have a good asset management system. You don't know, where all the asset resides. We had a project which took like years to just kind of map every server we got in the company, right? And multiple data centers, 20, 30 data centers. So that's really hard, right? When you build systems in AWS, since infrastructure is code in AWS, you get to track and you get to control and you get to be more consistent with your infrastructure. So that brings the benefit from a compliance point of view. Also, you can do continual repeatable testing because it's, again, code. You can bring up the whole templatized infrastructure along with the application, then you can bring it down and then test it again. And that repeatability is very important for some of the customers, like the pharma companies, the GXP compliance and all that stuff. And also the automatic traceability, which is built into the platform, right? If you were in a traditional IT shop, there'll be like 10 different kind of tools, 10 different kind of logging places, and then God knows whether the actual logging is happening or not, and then somebody has to be looking into that. So in AWS, you get this built, and we'll be talking about tools like CloudTrail, CloudWatch Logs, VPC Flow logs. So I'll get into that in a moment. So I'm not going to be again talking about the first part, which is when you start and how do you build the controllability in the cloud, which is like how do you set up IAM right, the identity and access management, how do you set up the fine-grained control, or how do you set up the encryption and all that. This talk is more geared about towards the second part where you reach a state where you built your system, and you want to then be able to kind of use the data points and the telemetry from the system to kind of know the health of the system, as well as kind of be able to respond to some of the activities, kind of build the compliance part of it. At the same time, you want to be able to trace, going back into what's going on in my system, right? So those are the services I'll be focusing on. So when we look at, first part I'll look at the logging part, and the second half of the presentation I'll look into the traceability part of the thing. So when we look at the logging in AWS, we kind of look at the logs in you can look at it in three different buckets, right? There are infrastructure logs because at the control plane layer, right? So everything is API based in AWS. So all the interactions you make with AWS, your own environment, there's an API call that's being made, and there's a response to that API call. That's getting recorded, whether you were successful in authenticating into that API. If you were successful, what was the response? If you got denied, all that. So all that automatically gets logged once you turn it on, of course, right? So if there's one thing you got to be looking out of this talk, make sure when you're using AWS, your CloudTrail is turned on and it's getting to a S3 bucket. And then you look at it, and that at least you have a traceability for that. VPC Flow log, recently launched feature, again, that gives you metrics into the nature of the traffic going in your VPC at a network level. And we'll get a little bit more detail into that. The second bucket is about service logs, right? Like Amazon S3 bucket access logs. So who's getting into your buckets, and what are they doing, what actions they're doing there. Our ELBs will send their logs in terms of the response time, latency, how much time they're taking to process the logs. CloudFront, Amazon CloudFront sends its own logs for, again, how many cache hits, how many misses, how many 404 errors served to the end customers. Again, this is really useful for you to be able to do operational optimization and maybe making decisions as to if you need to tweak your strategy. So we're building, as we build these services, we are making sure most of these services are covered by CloudTrail, number one. We're not 100% there yet. And also some of the special services like Lambda and CloudFront, they have their own access logs, right? Which provides additional data on top of the control plane access data that CloudTrail provides. That's really powerful. And the third bucket is the logs that are within your host, the instance, right? Those are like syslog messages, right? Or the security messages about the instance, so who logged in, how many people are trying to break into your system, and also operational logging. Maybe you're running a website and you have Apache logs and you want to kind of look into those. And so I'll talk about it, how we also kind of cater into analyzing those logs and take actions on those. So in terms of security-related events, these highlighted ones are the ones, areas are the ones where you would want to be looking into. And we'll talk about how do you get that in your AWS environment. So the first thing I want to talk about is Amazon CloudWatch Logs. It was released in 2014 reInvent. Amazon CloudWatch is ubiquitous logging and monitoring managed offering where you get to send your logs into the CloudWatch. It'll durably store those logs. It'll even rotate those logs. And you can even expire those logs if you want to at a certain duration. It's really economical. And I think there's a free tier, like up to 5 GB of the logs every month you can bring in free. And you can then set alarms and metrics and alarms on these logs. It's really powerful, actually. I hadn't actually played with it until I started preparing for this talk. And when I start doing building my kind of demo and playing with it, it's really powerful, actually. It sits in, it's built in, you don't have to buy anything. It becomes a central point where you can point your CloudTrail, you can point your VPC Flow logs, and then you can set some metrics on these logs, right? So let's say for CloudTrail, right? You send all your logs into CloudWatch Logs, and you can put metric filters as, okay, how many times I'm getting unauthorized messages? People are trying to break into my APIs, and they're not authorized to do so. And you can set a metric saying, hey, I want to know if somebody did that more than 5 times in a minute, right? Or in 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever time duration you want to. And then you can set an alarm saying that, hey, go do this thing. Go send up an email to me or SMS me or fire up a Lambda function. A Lambda is a kind of function in the cloud that'll go ahead and compute on your behalf, run whatever function you have and kind of revert back with the response. Other cool thing about CloudWatch Logs is you can export data out of CloudWatch Logs into S3, and you do your big data analytics like, for the technologies like data sciences using, right? Do Hadoop job on top of that, Spark, or do some sort of analytics, right? Or load it up into Redshift if you want to do cooler, dashboards and all that stuff, right? And lastly, we built in the export into Elasticsearch service. I don't know anybody using ELK stack here? Okay, I see a few hands. Cool. So Amazon, so I know Elasticsearch is one of the most popular open source projects out there. So Amazon has recently launched Amazon Elasticsearch version, which is a managed offering where we take care of availability, durability, and scalability, and security, right? We've added some goodness from the IAM side, so you can restrict that Elasticsearch cluster from access perspective, right? And we've also given you as part of that Kibana as the front end, and I'll be showing some of that. So I did mention CloudTrail a couple times. I want to just revisit it for you guys. I know most of you guys probably already seen that. So CloudTrail records all these 5 Ws, right? Who made the API call getting into your account? When was the API call made? what was the actual content of the call, right? And which resources it acted upon and what the response was and where the call was made from, an actual IP address that came from, right? So it looks like something like this. So I don't know how good you can see there, but it kind of tells you that it was an IAM user, right? So there are two kind of users in AWS environment. You could have account user, which is a root user. Highly recommended not to use that for any actions. Fire up your account, get IAM set up, get your users group, follow least privilege model, right? Individual accounts, and go from there. Don't use root for anything except from initially, I guess, setting up billing and support and all that stuff. And we're working on kind of remediating even the need of root account for those kind of functionality as well, because we want it to be all individual access. Shows, what was the ARN, which is the Amazon resource name in our lingo, what time it happened, what did we do about it, start logging here, which region was it, and where the request came from, right, and the resource. So that's all the data that gets recorded. And you have record for that for as long as you want to keep it, right? You send it to S3. It gets stored in compressed format. So there's no charge for CloudTrail, but you pay for the S3 storage, which is 3 cents per gig. But it's compressed 1:10 ratio, so you actually, tenth of 3 cents, right? 0.3 cents for every gig of the CloudTrail data getting into the S3. So it's a really cool thing to do. So some of the best practices, I think this is foundational, so I want to spend a little bit of time on the CloudTrail. You should enable it in all regions. We made it easier for you to enable it in all regions by just a click. You can say that, okay, I want to enable CloudTrail in all of the regions, all 12 regions we have, right? So it used to be that, you would say turn on CloudTrail. If you turn it on in one region, maybe somebody else is doing something fancy in the other regions that you're not even watching, right? So your primary workloads are in US, but maybe in Sydney region, there's something going on that it's just kind of on the blind spot. So turn it on for all the regions. You can have it all delivered into same bucket wherever you're doing the monitoring, right? You can turn on the log file validation, and log file validation means that you can check the CloudTrail log file in S3 for any kind of tampering. When we deliver the log file, we'll also deliver a SHA, HMAC for that, the hash for that log file. And you can match that with CLI. There are commands, and you can go and check that. You can encrypt the log files. They are encrypted by default on the S3, actually, without you doing anything on the server side. But you can choose to encrypt them with your own customer management key, encrypted key, so that you manage in KMS. By giving, of course, you have to give the right access to be able to call the KMS for that. Talked about integration of CloudTrail with the CloudWatch Logs that we already talked about, a durable store for getting all the logs into and do some magic on those logs and then push them out to Elasticsearch or S3. So that's great. And you can centralize all the logs. So we talked about CloudWatch Logs, CloudTrail. The other feature, again, I want to talk about is the VPC Flow logs. Not too long ago, I used to get a lot of questions from customers like, hey, how do I know? You guys have security groups. Those are the stateful firewalls on each instance. You have network access control list on the subnet. How do I know, how much traffic getting, hitting those ACLs, right? What's getting dropped? What's getting through? Didn't have a good way to do that until VPC Flow logs. Again, it's a no-cost feature. You simply turn it on, and everything magically, start getting monitored. You can turn it on the VPC level, so each network interface will start getting monitored. You can turn it on a specific interface on an instance, or you can turn it on a subnet basis, right? What actually happens is the mechanism is that all these logs in a batch format, I think in every 10-minute windows, we pick up the logs and we ship it through Kinesis into CloudWatch Logs, right? So you see those streams coming in. And I'll show you, time permitting, exactly how that looks. So you can, once you have those logs, you can do all that goodness like you were doing with CloudTrail. You can filter those logs for rejects or accepts, right? Do some operational analysis. You can do some security analysis. You can send some alerts. If you see a lot of rejects, then somebody's really trying to get in. and we'll look into that, right? And I think the last bullet is think about enabling on all of the VPC, because you could have hundreds of instances, right, and ELBs and other services. Do you really have to be thoughtful? Are you going to be using all those, right, logs? So you might want to monitor, certain set of, a subnet, which is your private, secure data endpoints. There are a few caveats with that. Some of the things we do not capture, which are things like DNS traffic to Amazon internally when the host get their name and IP address. We do not capture the DSCP calls and the Windows licensing calls. But apart from that, you get the 5 tuples, the headers for the IP packet, so to speak, right? And I'll kind of show you what that looks like, right? So this is how the logs kind of look like. It's agentless. Again, we talked about ENI, right? And what you see here is you get the account number, you get the interface, source, IP, destination IP, source port, destination port, what protocol, and the size, the size of the packets, number of packets. And then you see the accept and reject. Those accepts and reject are coming from security groups or network ACLs, right? So you can kind of analyze, if you really look, you see the protocol 6 here, and you can see the destination port 22. So that was SSH getting into, and that was rejected. Maybe it was coming from an IP address that was not part of the security group, right? So now you know that somebody intentionally tried to do SSH into your system. And you can push these logs into Elasticsearch from CloudWatch Log, like I talked about, and kind of see in the Kibana, kind of see what are the top 10 sources, in terms of rejects and accepts and the volume of the traffic. Keep in mind, this is again to give you the information on the traffic. It's not doing any deep packet inspection. We're not giving you the payload of the the packet. So as long as that kept in mind. So how do you manage and process these logs? I talked about CloudWatch, Elasticsearch, the ELK stack. You could also use, if you're really, really keen for it, if these logs get to S3, you can use a Lambda kind of a function, picking up all the logs as they come in and to process it, build your custom engine to do processing and take custom actions, right? So I want to show this kind of visual as to, what I'm talking about here. So, and let's talk like EC2 instance, we'll put the VPC also into that. So today, you can either directly come from an instance using a RESTful API call into Elasticsearch, or you can use the Logstash agents, like FileBeat is a good agent, right? Lightweight agent to send the logs and process them on a Logstash cluster. You can also bring in the logs from other sources, DynamoDB, Kinesis, and so on and so forth. And then I think I want to show you as to, this is CloudWatch Logs agent. I didn't talk much about it, but we also have a host-based agent. In the third bucket, remember we were talking about Apache logs and the Verilog and secure log. That's where we've released a product, our service, CloudWatch Agent. That's an agent you get on a Linux and Windows systems. It will parse any log file that you configure in there, right? You can send the whole log file from the start or whenever the time you want to start the logging and towards the end. And it'll send kind of near real time. It's pretty powerful, right? So you can monitor as many log files you want. It could be security related log, operations logs, and then push them to the CloudWatch Logs. From there, they get streamed out using Lambda into Elasticsearch. And we built that as a managed offering. So it's super easy if you want to do that. You just have to install that agent using your Chef, Ansible, or whatever tools you have, or use a run command or the user data when your instance starts, and configure it automatically. We already talked about CloudTrail and VPC Flow logs getting into the CloudWatch Logs. They getting into Elasticsearch, and that kind of gives you a common interface, right? All these logs go as a JSON documents into Elasticsearch, and you can build really powerful analytics and search engines. We also talked about the service logs. They can go to S3, and from there, Lambda can pick them up and then push into the Elasticsearch. And similarly, you can push a lot of the other services into that are not directly supported. So Lambda is kind of a super glue, right? It's really powerful. I think of it as a plumbing tool. You can build a lot of, service-oriented architectures and loosely coupled architectures by bringing, storage, S3 storage, and the processing. You process, you store, then you process, then you store, and then push into the right places. And apart from the, monitoring and doing that, we have a third-party, partners as well, thousands of partners. Evident is one of them, doing a lot of, if you want to go more deeper and augment the capability we have. When you turn on a CloudWatch agent, right, or when you turn on the CloudTrail, you send it to the CloudWatch Logs, and that's a configuration actually. And let me go to the actually CloudTrail directly, kind of show you how easy that is. Let me know if you don't follow along here. So this is the CloudTrail console, right? In here, you can also, apart from configuring CloudTrails, where you go to the trails, you also see the last API activity. You can see for a week and what APIs were made to your environment. So you can search them. But here you go into the trails. And you see I've built a lot of trails here, right? I was kind of testing, playing with them. And this is my kind of default trail. And this is the CloudTrail configuration. You just simply say, when I configure that, apply CloudTrail to all regions. You specify the bucket it's going to. In my case, it's Raj Verma CloudTrail. And this is optional CloudWatch Logs, right? So, but I decided to push it into a CloudWatch, and I just defined the log group. And this is kind of a nice, neat thing here that we've already kind of codified some basic security metrics for you. So you don't have to create those metrics and alarms for yourself. So you can click on those, and it'll already kind of create those metrics for you. And these metrics are something like unauthorized attempts, EC2 state changes, so on and so forth. And I'll show you probably some of that. And then you can also do configuration as to whether you want this to be encrypted, you want to be shipping it to the digest files and all that. So that's Trails. Now I want to go to the CloudWatch Logs. So just 1 second. So those are accessed through CloudWatch panel. So if you go into the logs, so CloudWatch is our managed monitoring metric service. You can get performance metrics like CPU usage, the disk I usage, read operations, write operations. But we're now using it for security log analysis as well and log storage. So you go to logs, and you will see that this CloudTrail default group is actually the group where I was pushing my CloudTrail logs into. And you'll see that when I click on this, that I see all these CloudTrail events coming in through, right? So these are coming as the JSON documents. Any action taken on my account and my resources, all the APIs are getting recorded here. And I can get all these back into, right, at the log group level. I can ship them into Elasticsearch domain here because I've created a subscription. And I have defined like 10 filters. These 10 filters came in automatically. That little link I showed you, I know it's too hard to read here, but I'll read some of them for you. So these are, the first one is about authorized failures, right? It's creating an alarm on that. So basically what it does is create this filter pattern, because it already sees, right? It already indexed all the logs. It sees that you are sending these events, and then you can assign a metric into this and saying, hey, you know what? If I see my failure count greater than 1, in my case, I was just testing, right? So I said more than 1 in one consecutive period, and each period is 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes, if anytime anybody tried to break into my API without proper authorization, I will know. What will it do? It'll send a notification to this notification topic, which is basically sending an email to my email account, right? And I'll get that email. You probably get between 5 to 10 minutes, you'll get that notified, right? And then we have, other here. Let's see what else is interesting. So console login failures, right? Then we have CloudTrail changes, instance changes. If instance is starting, will tell you that, and some of the other metrics, right? So you easily can define other metrics. The other thing I want to show you is the agent logs with the EC2 agent. I have a EC2 agent running in my account, VPC, and I've installed the CloudWatch Logs agent. And there I configured, to monitor the VPC secure logs. I'm sorry, not the VPC secure log, the var log secure messages that basically talk about, if anybody's trying to get into my account. And I intentionally kept it open on the internet, like, bring it on and see kind of a honeypot, see what's going on. You'll see there's a lot of invalid, if I search on here, or unauthorized users. Let me see what, So I get to that, and when I get to Kibana, right? So this is kind of the concept is you have log groups, and within log groups you have streams. Same for VPC Flow logs. When I turn on the VPC Flow logs, these are all the ENIs, or the network interfaces, that are streaming data into the CloudWatch logs. If I click on each, you'll see, these are the accepts and rejects, and the source, and what protocol, like we talked about, right? And the key thing here is, I'm pushing all these three kind of logs into Elasticsearch that I've built in again into my environment. So I want to kind of show you that how it looks to Elasticsearch. I'll just so this is how I'm seeing all the data. And you can do that too. So let's say last 4 hours. Okay, so it's showing nothing because I'm down selected here. It's loading slow here. So, okay. So I want to remove that and kind of see all the logs coming in. Okay. Kind of taking a little bit of time. But you get all the events here now. Everything is going to CloudWatch logs, all the VPC, the CloudTrail, the agent, application logs, and they're eventually getting consolidated into Elasticsearch. And this is just the front-end engine to that Elasticsearch, right, that I can access. Don't know why it's running so slow. I guess, guess it's about to crash, I guess. So I might have to kill it. But I have other Kibana 3 running here as well. So we do provide the dashboards for Kibana 3. And you'll see these are the real-time statistics from my VPC based all on the VPC Flow logs, right? You see, all kind of statistics that, what are the source port, how many of them are accepted, destination ports, what's going on, how many were rejected. Looks like this guy is really, he had like 4 attempts. And again, we're looking at only last 4 hours. There's not much going on in my VPC, just 10 MB of data, and you can see the top 10 kind of analytics. So this is all stuff you can get started very quickly by just configuring VPC Flow logs, sending them to CloudWatch, and then firing up Elasticsearch, Amazon Elasticsearch, in minutes, and then kind of getting the link from there. It kind of displays you the link for the Kibana, and you get there, snap. Okay, I wish I could show you. I'm going to try once more. It's kind of important. I guess okay, here it is, right? You can see in Kibana, like these are the last 4 hours, right? All the logs. So star means bring me all the logs. And you'll see here, if I show you the log groups here, these are the log groups data it got for last 2 hours, VPC. There's no application data coming here. But let's say if I go to my website, right? I just made a kind of fake website, quaintcloud.com, and there's nothing going on here. If I just type, let's say, data science, right? There's no page as data science there, right? So it should give me not found. So yeah, that's what I get. But it should have made into the CloudWatch Logs agent. That should have picked it up, near real time pushed into CloudWatch Logs, then to Elasticsearch, and then here. So if I search for data science, maybe within a second or so, maybe not with the first thing. Oh, look, we already see that here in the Kibana, right? It shows here that somebody was trying to do data science, right? Page, and it was rejected. right? So you could do like build kind of visualization and analytics using that whole stack, and we made it really easy for you to do so. So I'm going to go back into the console quickly, show you where we're doing some of the other things. So here's the 2 filters I've created. So these filters again go into, like, give me all the 400 errors, right? If something you see, and this was the filter that got kicked on, and I probably would have received an email saying, hey, somebody tried to do something with your site, right? So don't have time now to go into those, but basically you can trigger different kind of actions, whether emails or Lambda. So I'm going to go back to my deck here quickly and kind of go talk about some of the other traceability cool stuff we have that you should be using. So how do you automate the compliance check? Once you have all this data, what do you do with that, right? So we talked about self-managed, that the first one. You can do this CloudWatch alerts we talked about there. You can also use Lambda. You could also use AWS config rules, but we'll talk about just shortly. And inspector also, time permitting, that can do some of the host-based compliance, detection and remediation. We'll also get into the CloudWatch event. So AWS config. This is a service, kind of think of it as a CMDB in the cloud, right? It gets you all the information about, what resources you have, how those resources are related to other resources, right? And it records them continuously, all the configurations. It keeps the versioning of every resource record. So if, let's say, you had a security group, right? It's going to record that. It's going to record that whether it's attached to an instance or not. What kind of ports it already have permitting. If somebody makes a change, it's going to create a new configuration item, and also remember what was the previous data point about that configuration item. Kind of gives you a time series view. You can also get notified if any change happens. You can kind of selectively filter that, hey, I want to know if anybody's touching that particular security group, because that's really, really important for me. That's my front gate. Nothing should be happening hunky-dory there, right? So, or you can say any security group. I don't want anybody to be opening up SSH to the world, right? If you see /0 in the source IP address, just tell me. Anybody fires up a security group in my account, whole account, right? So config can do that. And this kind of, it takes all the resources, the service kind of keeps the versions of the various configuration items, stores them, and then kind of delivers them into a S3 bucket, kind of a snapshot of your configuration, right? You can go back and kind of do a time series in our console, see a particular resource. It'll actually show you, in this particular date, there were so many changes made, and you can dig into what those changes were, right? And you can go back as to when that resource was created. It's very powerful for auditors, basically, to show them as evidence that, look, this is how my environment is. This is how all the changes are being made. All of them are recorded here, right? Kind of gives you that evidence for compliance. You can show them, and it's really important for some of the things like HIPAA, repeatability, like the GXP and all that. We took a step further with, we've been notifying customers if configuration changes, but then customers asking, can we do something with it? Apart from just sending me a message, email or SMS, can we do something? Can you make some rules, so that there could be some automated action taken on those? So that's where the config rules come into play. You can automate your response to change. If something changes, let's say security group, somebody opens up 000, you can actually create an action that go back and either disable that security group or detach it or whatnot. It could be instance that is launched without a tag for cost center, right? I know many customers kind of build that scripting, right? And in your case, Dave, you guys build that, right? Config rules would do that for you. It'll detect that if there's an instance that coming up without a particular tag. It'll tell you that it's out of compliance, and it'll let you, kind of take an action on that. So we saw this for the config. We've just added a rules vertical line there just to kind of, take action, right? So we have some managed rules built in the box. Out of the box, you get to use them. So like, hey, all the instances must be in the VPC. All the, so that nobody's kind of, some customers still have classic access, right? They can go out and fire up instance in the EC2 classic. EBC volume must be encrypted when it is attached to my instance, right? CloudTrail must be enabled. If it is not, let me know. And hey, you can also do something. So there could be an action you can define there that go back and turn it on, right? And also there's a community that's building some custom rules out there in our partner ecosystem, where they're saying, hey, like for example, Trend Micro is building something using config rules. Anytime a new instance comes up, I want to do some sort of assessment, maybe push an agent, check for something. There could be many creative ways that they could be using. So that was kind of the config and config rule side of things. There's also a notion of CloudWatch Events. That's a service kind of getting you access into our service messaging bus. Sorry. Okay, 5 minutes? Yeah, I'm just kind of, close to that. So again, you could have trigger based on API calls. It could be EC2 state change. It could be auto scaling events, or it could be you pushing those messages to events. But this is a really action-oriented service where you could have a very rapid response. You don't have to wait 5 to 10 minutes for CloudTrail to deliver that change to you. So many services can let you do that very quickly. Okay, so those are the kind of input to that. And you can define rules within the CloudWatch event saying, hey, this is what I want to do once I see that message coming in. Again, you can qualify the message. And you can say that, okay, go fire up, either send it to, a Kinesis stream or Elasticsearch, or fire up a Lambda function, or, fire up some of the built-in things I have done. Like, hey, anytime you see EBS volume come up, go ahead and make sure it's encrypted with KMS key, right? Attaching. So you can kind of automate your security using CloudWatch events and kind of respond quickly to some of the actions. It also has a cron in the cloud, so you can schedule CloudWatch events. So you can say, hey, every 1 minute I want to do this checking, this particular thing I want to run in the cloud. So this kind of gives you that capability, scheduling events in the cloud, and you can do a 1 minute level. So those were kind of the logging and traceability side of things. We also launched recently AWS Inspector. This is where we started delving into, I was showing the shared security model. We are below hypervisor level. We take care of everything, and then we give you the, knobs and levers for you to kind of build your environment securely. With Inspector, we're trying to give you an easy to start and automated way to run security checks on the instances. Right? It's an agent-based combination of some of the other services in Amazon, and kind of build our kind of goodness into that. And that's because, things, and I think John will talk to that, Sec DevOps, right? You don't want security to be the slower part or slowing down your development and bringing the functionality. You want security to be going at the same speed or even faster, right? And closing that feedback loop quickly so that nobody's waiting on anything, and you get notified if there's anything happening inside that instance, right? So you get all that insight. And we've built like all our knowledge in Amazon for maintaining and managing the whole fleet of servers for years and years, kind of bring that into this Inspector space. So it has a configuration scanning engine. It has a built-in content library that it refers to, right? Those are common CVEs, which are vulnerabilities and exposures, commonly known, the CIS config benchmark and all that. They also do runtime behavior analysis, so it'll know exactly that, hey, you guys are, there are these ports that are idle. You guys are never using, but there seem to be some services listening on these ports. It would also know that, hey, you have some insecure root processes that are, not needed. You should be using in a more controlled, lower level authorization. Right, and it's fully automated, accessible through API, auditable, goes to CloudTrail. So that's the, we're bringing that into. These are some of the things it kind of checks for. So CV is a industry standard, common vulnerabilities and exposures. You have CIS, Internet Security, OS Security Benchmark, that's reputed one, and a network security best practice and so forth. So yeah, it gives you increased agility. So it could become part of your whole pipelines, right? So anytime new instances come up, you just automatically do the compliance check and bring back what you need to do. So we talked about a lot of tools. So I just wanted to show this out there that again, CloudTrail is kind of repository for every change happening. Config is kind of your repository for resources in your environment and kind of record for that. Inspector kind of gives you a way to move fast, right? An automated check within the instance. Trusted Advisor, I didn't show you that, but there's a slide coming up. It's kind of a built-in, without any input. We tell you, if you're running something insecure in your environment. And CloudWatch Events is a very action-oriented response, right? So these are the built-on reporting stuff. You will automatically, if you go to Trusted Advisor in your account, you'll see all these checks automatically done and kind of give you some actionable intelligence as to, hey, you're running, insecure things and what you need to do about it. You also can see the credential report. If you go to your credentials in the security section, it'll tell you which account last used, and when they use it, and whether they used MFA or not. And don't forget about detailed billing also. That kind of give you some idea about, if you see a spike, whether it's authorized one or unauthorized usage, right? You can set up alarms and alerts on that. So I just want to round up in the interest of time, right? So leverage all these built-in tools if you're not already. Turn on CloudTrail, play with CloudWatch Logs, look at Elasticsearch. They're very, again, Amazon, pretty economical to play with. And maybe you fall in the free tier if you're not used with them. Use managed services like Elasticsearch. You don't have to set up your own clusters and all that, right? And see the big picture, what info you want and what tool can give you that. So, lastly, move fast and stay secure. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Again, thank you, Neeraj, for that wonderful session on AWS Security. And Neeraj actually made a lot of great points, and I'll touch on some of those tonight, actually. But my name is John Martinez. I come from the faraway land known as the Bay Area. Don't hate me because I'm a Giants fan. I know we're right at baseball season, but that's not probably popular. Okay. I think I have to step out now, right? All you Dodgers fans? But anyway, so I come from the Bay Area. I work for a company called Evident.io. We are a cloud security company. We do how Neeraj put up the customer responsibility side of the shared responsibility model. That's what we take care of for you. So we give you visibility into what your responsibility is as an AWS customer and our responsibility collectively as AWS customers. So tonight I'm going to be talking about secure DevOps on AWS. It's going to be a little bit of sort of culture talk. So there's going to be some of that kind of topic. It's going to be a little bit of code. So I'll be showing some code snippets. But before I go into a little bit more about myself, I want to hear about you guys. So those of you guys here tonight, how many of you guys are sort of noobs in AWS? You've been using it for less than a year. You kind of learning. You're here to absorb and just kind of take it all in. Awesome. So how many of you guys are pros? You've been experts in AWS. I know everything there is to know. Mark, put your hand down. Awesome. No, that's good to hear. And just by show of hands, how many of you are sort of what ops, DevOps kind of folks? That's your proclivity. How many of you are like dev? I code for a living. Okay. A couple of brave souls. Cool. How many of you guys are both polyglots like I am? All right. Awesome. That's cool. And the next, because we are on topic, right? How many of you guys are security folks? The dreaded Dr. Nose of your company, right? Awesome. And we'll talk a little bit about that because, I straddle both sides of the world, actually. So I've been seen as a Dr. No, and I've been seen as all right, let's get this done fast, right? So a little bit about me. So I've been doing cloud stuff for about 6 years. Did the flip over between the old data center, working on Oracle Sun systems and all of that fun stuff, over to AWS at a little place called Netflix that decided, we're going to go all in on AWS a few years ago. So that's where I cut my teeth. Really large scale environment. I mean, that's one of the largest on AWS. And then right after that, I went to go work at Adobe, where we built this thing called Creative Cloud. Oops, went backwards. We built this thing called Creative Cloud. So my job was actually not security. My job was managing a cloud platform engineering team. So we lived, breathed AWS. We automated all of the things AWS. And so it was a really, really fun job. But I came over here along with our founders who I work with over at Adobe to found Evident.io. And again, our life is all about talking about security with AWS customers. That's what we do. We live, breathe, and talk and eat AWS security. So that's what we do. Just a couple of, I like to put a little personal snippet here too. I'm starting to hack Lambda. So really, really super loving the Lambda experience, and I can't wait. It's back ordered. I can't believe it. It's my actually a couple of Amazon Echoes are in back order, but I want to figure out how to hack Echo and make it all work with Lambda, and figure out maybe I'll come up with a project or two on that as it relates to cloud security. But at the very least, I'll geek out and do all kinds of fun stuff. All right, so cool. You already know what you're doing here, right? It's just kind of a fun slide I like to put up there. So we're going to talk about secure DevOps on AWS. And look at some code snippets. That's what we're here to do. So I want to make this, I know we're going to have a Q&A time afterwards, but if you have like this burning question that you can't wait to the very end, because I am going to go about 2.5 hours, maybe. Just kidding. So no, if you have something that you want to jump up and say, pick me, ask, I want to ask a question now. I don't want to wait for the very end. That's okay. Just make sure we keep them a little bit short. If it's like a long question, Neeraj and I will be up here and we'll be answering questions. But definitely raise up your hand and I'll call on you. All right, so I'm going to go pretty quickly here. Again, we don't have all night. You guys need to get home and all that stuff. As nice as my voice sounds, I do want to get you home on time. But there is a lot of what we preach on at Evident.io is all about what you as a customer, again, what your responsibilities are on AWS in terms of security. But we also like to make those correlations to something that's very practical. And so to that end, we do have a top 10 security best practices list. For those of you that are paying attention, it's actually 11 because we start counting from 0. So, and this actually goes with Neeraj's point, is my 0th security best practice on AWS is enable CloudTrail, and you'll see why in a little bit here. But I'm going to talk about some of the patterns in secure DevOps on AWS, and one of those patterns is actually visibility. All of his presentation, basically, right? So we'll talk about that really quickly. I'll show a really quick code snippet for that trait. But really what it comes down to, so this is the Evident.io top 10 security list. What we're working towards, and it's something that Neeraj mentioned, is we are very, very big believers, in fact, to the point where we were part of, we got invited to the table for the CIS AWS Foundations benchmark. So if you guys are familiar with it, awesome. Definitely something that we are going to start preaching on pretty heavily here, pretty heavily really, really soon here. And it's going to be baked into the platform and all of that. But Neeraj mentioned a little bit, the Foundations benchmark is an absolute great place to start for what should I do? Now I've got this shiny new AWS account, now what? What do I do, right? So that's the goal of the Foundations benchmark is at, and there's going to be other benchmarks coming later on too. But the idea is, here's the top 10 list. You can go by that as just a bare minimum. The Foundations benchmark is going to cover this much more. So we're very excited about all of that work that went into it by AWS and a few of the partners and customers. So let's get into sort of I would say, the cultural aspects of what, I don't want to call it, the war between DevOps and security, because, we'll talk about how both can coexist very nicely together. But let's talk about what the needs are of Dev and DevOps, right? All of you guys that are doing DevOps, that are responsible for deploying your application stacks onto AWS, you're basically the caretakers of your product. If you're deploying a SaaS product, whatever it is on top of AWS, you know that as part of your job, you need to have all of these traits, right? You need to build application stacks that are resilient. If you're using autoscaling, awesome. You need to be flexible. You need to have reliability, right? I'm worried about this stuff. I'm worried about speed. I'm worried about how fast I can get my applications from the time that my developers commit to the GitHub repo to the time that it translates into an actual application stack. Huge fan of CloudFormation, right? So if you guys haven't used CloudFormation, really, really highly recommend you get into CloudFormation because, again, stampable environments. Boom, here's my VPC in a CloudFormation template that I can just go and build. Literally, and we've seen, if you've been to reInvent or some of the summits, right, you've seen the little sticker that AWS gives out that's, I built my data center in 5 minutes. Literally, I can build an entire data center on AWS in 5 minutes, right? So these are your needs. These are what DevOps folks and developers who are responsible for deploying large scale and medium scale and whatever scale application that's your production environment on AWS. That's what you're worried about. Now, what is IT and security? I kind of lumped them in together, right? Those of you guys that are IT guys don't hate me, but literally, because I've been there, right? We're seen as, Dr. Knows, right? Because we're given the responsibilities of making sure that my company's brand, my company's product has all of these things, right? Stability. I need to have control. I need to be able to know what those crazy DevOps dudes are deploying onto AWS. I'm accountable, right? So, I know metrics like how much per hour we're losing in revenue because the site is down. These are the things that I'm responsible for as a security person. I'm responsible for all of this. Risk aversion, right? That's where the no comes from, right? I am averse to risk. I have to put a lot of that second bad word that's up there, controls, to be able to get around that risk, right? And compliance is part of it. Neeraj talked definitely about it. Compliance is somewhere in there, right? Or all of these make up, the sum of all these make up compliance in some cases, right? So these are the things that I'm worried about. So, in relation to a developer who has been given the task of developing this application and deploying it at a really rapid pace, these seem at odds, right? Well, I will go and challenge that in a converged world, I can have all of that. And AWS is one of those platforms, literally, where I can make it all a reality, right? Neeraj pointed out to us a lot of the security aspects of AWS, a lot of the, the logging and a lot of the metrics-driven aspects of AWS that can satisfy a lot of my needs as a security person. At the same time, API-driven infrastructure gives me a lot of that speed and agility and flexibility that I, as a developer and a DevOps person, need to have, right? So I can have both. And I would say that, hey, as a security person, I have a lot to learn from those DevOps people, right? I can automate, if that DevOps person can automate a lot of the infrastructure capabilities of AWS, I can use that to my strength, right? And that's a little bit of what we'll get into. So what's the first pattern in sort of that converged secure DevOps world? Number one is visibility. Again, this is the point that Neeraj talked about and delved right in. I need to have the ability to look at things. Security is a shared responsibility, so give everyone visibility, right? As a security person, if I'm in charge of, if it's my responsibility as a security person to maintain, to centralize, to analyze the CloudTrail logs, for example, I need to make sure that everybody has visibility into those, right? Because if I'm saying, you DevOps person, you're responsible, we're a team, you're responsible for what you deploy in your environment, whether that's one AWS account, several AWS accounts, you're responsible, so I'm going to give you visibility. I'm going to give you, from my perspective, the tools that'll help you succeed in helping me become more visible and more secure in your environments. So again, I'm not going to talk a lot about what Neeraj, this is right hand in hand with a lot of what Neeraj talked about. Just from a code perspective, an example, Neeraj went deep into CloudTrail. I'm going to show a code example of how you can use a particular API call, lookup events. So wonderful API call. CloudTrail allows you to not just, you don't have to just go into the log files and that's where you go and ingest all of your CloudTrail logs and look at them over history. The CloudTrail lookup events call, API call, is a really, really powerful tool in your security arsenal to be able to get very rapid, I would say, if you have a security event and I want to look at what's gone on in that EC2 instance right now, or if somebody terminated a production instance, I can go use lookup events to look up that particular event, right? Terminate instances, right? I can go look up that API call using the lookup events call. Let me go pop over into, and And I have code snippets there, so as you saw on the previous screen here. All of the code that I'll be talking about tonight is available on that public GitHub repo there, so you can get to all of that. Let me pop over into terminal. And wrong window. All right. So in this particular case, I have an EC2 instance that I want to go look at all of the events of. I want to go check out, I want to go see what's going on in that particular EC2 instance. So I wrote a really quick Ruby script. I'm a Rubyist at heart. I've been writing Ruby for a couple of years. Lambda has forced me to kind of start thinking about Python, which is not a bad thing, right? So, and yeah, thumbs up, right? I actually love Python. You know, being a Ruby guy, you know, I'm used to sort of writing the same thing like 20 ways. Python forces me into a little bit, you know, indentations and other stuff like that. But that's cool. It's just a means to an end. So in this particular case, I wrote a Ruby script that uses the lookup events API call and checks out that EC2 instance. So let's go run it real quick, and then I'll show the code. So I'm going to look up that event. That went really, really fast. So, but that's OK, because in this particular example, the events scroll backwards. So let me scroll up. All right, let's go take a look at what's going on with that EC2 instance. All right, so I'm looking up the events. I see a first event. The first event that I see there, so this is the newest event. So let's kind of go to the oldest event down here. So the oldest event that I have for that particular instance is, scrolling is kind of weird here. All right. So basically 2 events, event 0 and event 1. So in this particular case, there's a start instances API call that's made to that particular EC2 instance ID. I'm exposing a little bit of the parameters that I get back. So event name is start instances, the time, the user that ran that particular API call, and also what instance type, et cetera, right? And so if we delve a little bit deeper into the actual event down there, we'll see that that particular user, which is me, you know, and I have admin rights, you know, based on the username, but let's see. One particular interesting thing that I see here, so this is kind of the way to think about in terms of when you're looking at this type of output in a security incident type of scenario, is that, okay, so this user, John, is MFA authenticated. So that's pretty good, right? You know, so that sets me a little bit at ease, that I know that that person's IAM credentials didn't get hacked or didn't get owned some way, right? So that's pretty cool. It's an MFA authenticated. It was invoked by signin.amazonaws.com. Anybody care to tell me what that source could be? What is signin? So there's a user agent again, signin.amazonaws.com. That's probably the AWS console, right? So user John logged in on the AWS console and fired up an instance. And then I've got a bunch of other stuff. But another sort of interesting little tidbit that I see there in the lookup events output is the source IP address. So I can then go and deduce more about that incident, right? So in a real world scenario, right, if you have an event, if you've just been compromised, right, you can use this API call really quickly to kind of surmise a few things about your environment, right? What sort of things are happening. So again, target your resource. Your target resource, what do you want to look at? Do you want to look at an EC2 instance? Do you want to look at, you know, what's going on an S3 bucket? You know, basically all of the resource types that CloudTrail supports. On the flip side, you can also go look at, all right, well, a bunch of my EC2 instances are disappearing, so I can go and formulate the input parameters to look up events to look up for an event type. So I can go see, all right, who's terminating my instances? What's terminating my instances? Is it a user? Is it auto-scaling? Is it, you know, because it could be, and it may not necessarily be a nefarious event, right? It could be that I have my CloudFormation template again. You know, I professed my love for CloudFormation. But it could be that, you know, the developer inadvertently put, you know, the wrong parameters to my auto-scaling group, right? So now, instead of maybe too an aggressive of a policy, of a terminate policy. So it could be that maybe that's what's happening, right? So that's the kind of stuff that CloudTrail will expose you to. So let's take a look at the source code real quick. All right, so let's see. It's kind of hard to look this way because I'm not mirroring my display. So let's see, assume role. All right, so here is the all right, there we go. So here's the source code to that particular Ruby script. All right, so calling in the AWS SDK. I'm using the instance ID as my argument, my input argument, startup CloudTrail. There's the lookup events API call down here with the input parameters, starting from that line there. And so this is the attribute key that I'm using is a resource name. But in here, you can also use like an event type, for example, like I was just saying, right? So that's exactly how I would bring about using the lookup events API call in a programmatic fashion, right? So let's go back to my second pattern in secure DevOps. It's identity management, right? Managing my identities in AWS. Definitely, you want to look at certain attributes to that trait, so certain traits to that particular pattern. The use of temporary credentials. Definitely, if you're not familiar with EC2 roles for EC2 instances, highly, highly, highly recommend, right? You definitely don't want to manage static API keys in your applications that are running on your EC2 instances that need to communicate with AWS services. If you need to do, for example, your application needs to stuff an object into an S3 bucket, for example, or if it needs to write and read messages out of an SQS queue, as another example. Stuff like that, right? If your application needs to talk to an AWS service in any way, shape, or form, definitely use EC2 instance roles. So that's non-static API keys. Identity federation, something that a lot of us don't really think about until we've got way too many AWS accounts, right? And now all of a sudden I've got to manage 100 accounts on 100 IAM users on 100 AWS accounts. Real life story. That's what I lived for a while ago, right? It gets really hard. So definitely identity federation. Both of those, by the way, use the security token service. EC2 instance roles use it in the background. You don't see it, but they use the security token service. Particularly, they use the assume role call of the security token service. So STS assume role assumes from an underprivileged account, assumes basically greater privilege, or in some cases, cross-account privilege. So if I want to be able to use my credentials in account A, but make an API call in account B, I can use STS and assume role specifically for that. Identity federation uses STS assume role with some special flavoring, right? It uses SAML and some others as a different flavor of assume role. But basically the idea is assume role returns to you temporary access credentials, right? It gives you everything you're familiar with in an IAM user perspective. It gives you temporary API access key, temporary secret key, and a temporary auth token. So you're able to use those by default 1 hour expiration time or shorter than that. There's an awesome service. It is a best practice, I will say, and we as Evident.io, as a third-party partner of AWS's, we use the STS assume role mechanism to look at the infrastructure in your AWS accounts, right? Really nice thing about assume role is that I can then apply policies, IAM policies, very granular IAM policies to those roles. So again, a very old security notion of the concept of least privilege, right? I want to only give that role as much privilege as it needs to get its job done, right? Nothing more than that. So in my next code example, I'm going to be showing the assume role call and how it's used to be able to gain those temporary tokens. So it's going to be a really, really easy example. Basically what I'm doing is I'm using the API access key of an underprivileged IAM user that can't make the describe regions call, right? So it's very, very simple call, right? You know, there's not much to it. I'm just basically describing all the regions. And then I'm going to use assume role to elevate my privilege for that IAM user and give it the ability to make the describe regions call, the EC2 describe regions call. So let's go to my terminal here. All right. So I already have it there. By the magic of command line history, I already have it set up. So I'm going to run this really quick. So first thing I'm going to do is try describe regions with my credentials. I get an unauthorized operation error from the SDK. And then I'm going to call assume role to that particular role, John demo role, very exciting, right? I'm running a live demo. And from that, I get a temporary access key ID. And the assume role call tells me when the expire date of that key is. So after that time, it's gone. I can't use it anymore. I assume the role, and boom, EC2 describe regions, and there I am, right? So I'm able to now call describe regions. What does that look like? What does the source code look like? All right. All right. So here we are. Same thing, it's a Ruby script. I'm calling both STS and EC2 clients here. Now this is one thing I will say, you know, again, not a holy war, but you know, time calculations in Ruby, awesome. Time.now, time.7 days ago, right? I can use sort of English-like language. But here we go. So I have a rescue block there, for those of you guys that are familiar with Ruby, so that I can trap particularly the unauthorized operation exception in Ruby. So I call EC2 describe regions. I'm expecting that I'm going to get an unauthorized exception. So I'm already expecting that, so I trap it. And there it is, you know, unauthorized exception. Then I go and call the assume role call. And there it is. So the two things I need to give to assume role are the role ARN that I want to call. So when you create the role, and then you assign the policy to that role, you attach a policy, or you have an inline policy, whichever one you choose. And then I have to give it a role session name so that I know exactly and I can trace exactly which sessions I'm calling for particular things. And then I'm collecting from the output all of the necessary credentials. So the access key ID, the secret access key ID, they're in lines 30 to 32. And then I just print it out real quick on the screen. And then I go ahead and call the client again. If you look there on lines 39 through 43, I'm calling the client again. But this time, I'm passing along as input parameters to the call, or to the client, I'm passing in the temporary credentials. So then I basically repeat that same rescue block again, that same block of code, right? Where I call describe regions, and you guys saw the output. All right, so that's IAM roles, and the pattern number 2. So pattern number 3, this is automated response techniques. Neeraj definitely touched on some of them. I'm going to show you guys a flavor of what I mean by that using our own product, which is one of the strengths that we have, is to be able to respond to certain things that happen in your AWS environment. Right, so here the ability is, or the traits of automated response is that now that I have visibility, now that I've secured my identity stack, right, so I know who's coming in, I know and I have visibility across everything. Now I want to be able to respond to certain events, right? I want to be able to, as things happen or as things get misconfigured, go and fix them automatically for me. Basically, have my bots do my job for me, right? That's the whole point of secure DevOps, right? Real world, why do I want to do that? Why do I want to invest in that time? Because I want to tighten up that opportunity window. EC2, the EC2 IP address space, the S3 bucket namespace, GitHub public repos, those are 3 examples of places that bad people go and target. So the most scanned set of IP addresses is the EC2 IP address space, right? And everybody's going to be seeing what kind of stuff are into those S3 buckets that are globally accessible, right? So they're going to be cruising through all that stuff, right? So chances are you might run into a time where you inadvertently open port 22 to the world, right? You have, and it's an inadvertent rule, maybe it's malicious, right? Somebody opens up SSH to the world because it's easy, because, well, I can't be bothered with, looking up in Google what's my IP, right? And I just want to, don't bother me with any of that level of detail, right? So I'm going to open up the security group to the entire world for port 22. I'm going to close it up in 10 minutes anyway. Realistically, by practice, how many people actually close up that rule after they're done with their job, right? Yeah, you do, because you know what you're doing, right? It's human nature, right? Oops, I forgot. I got busy. I was analyzing my code. It was, some kind of outage, something. By the time I go and fix the problem, I get the site back up, I forget to close that security group, right? So what we're proposing is to have evident-driven responses to those types of misconfigurations, because eventually somebody's going to notice that that public IP address space, especially for public EC2 instances, has port 22 open to the world. Ooh, what can I find here? There's some cool stuff here, right? And not saying that you're going to be running an out-of-date version of SSH, but you could, or you could have some other port open that has some other vulnerable application there, just for the ripeness of picking. It also allows you to have, and this is for you compliance heads here, active enforcement of policies and controls. Right? I can now have these bots, actively enforcing my controls. If, for example, I talked to a customer today who was wanting to delve into the world of having a nice, well-defined tagging policy within their company, right? Within their organization. So, you can go to the point, and I think, Kevin, and I think in your meetup in Halloween a year or two ago, I talked about this sadistic SecOps manager, right? That does all these nasty things to his users, right? This could be one of those types of scenarios, right? Where, hey, if you're not tagging your instances a certain way, guess what, buddy? I'm terminating. I have my Lambda function here. I'm terminating your stuff, right? But because those of us that have, and this is across the board, DevOps and SecOps, right? Both sides can live this last bullet item, right? At 2 in the morning, it's not funny, right? It's not funny. I'd rather go fix that problem at 2 in the morning and worry about it in the morning when we wake up and we have that post-mortem call. Right? Because now, right, the site's back up, the problem's fixed, crisis averted at 2 a.m. Now we can go all back to bed, right? All right, so what does that look like? Oops, one click too many. No, I went backwards. All right, so auto remediation of security issues found by Evident Security Platform, that's what ESP stands for. That's the company I work for. We believe in actionable security. Guided remediation, full-on visibility to security misconfigurations. Now using, and this is an old bullet item, don't mind. I had a passive version of auto remediation that was a Ruby script. Now it's all a nice, cool Lambda function that I'll show you. But the idea is, again, if somebody opens up SSH to the world, I can go take immediate action. So our platform is near real time. Meaning that you shouldn't have more than 5 to 15 minutes of opportunity window if you have something like this enabled, right? So that's the whole idea. So what does that code look like? So here I have Lambda function. So we send alerts as JSON documents over to SNS. So the way it works is that we integrate with SNS. We send an alert, basically, SSH open to the world. Here's the whole JSON snippet of what security group, what region, which account, all of that cool stuff. We send it over to SNS, which in turn SNS sends to a subscriber, which is a Lambda function, and then it executes this Lambda code. And what this Lambda code is doing, it's basically taking the payload that it found in SNS, so that's the event, we're calling it. And within that event, it's a message, so it's the actual evident.io security message. And then we go and do a little bit more JSON massaging, and we call it an alert. And then there's some print functions for debugging purposes and such. But then I go and I look for regions. I look for a certain data type or object type called metadata, which is coming from us. And then I go and take a look at and inspect, okay, which security group it is, which security group ID it is, what's the description and name, et cetera, right? And then I go and I call this function down here, call auto remediate. So I call the auto remediate function down here. And then that goes down here to this function down here, auto remediate. So I do a couple things here in auto remediate. First, I go ingest the security group ID from the evident data. Then I loop through all of the security groups and all of the permissions for the security groups. I basically do a really quick analysis. Okay, does it match that port that I'm getting from the alert itself? And if it does, I go take the drastic measure of revoking that security group ingress rule, right? So active enforcement of port 22 open to the world, fixing it right away. Awesome. And what does that look like? All right, so again, using some of the tools that Neeraj talked about earlier, here's the Lambda function. I can go see the execution of that Lambda function in CloudWatch Logs. So there it is, as it's executed. I can see that, based on a message, there was an offending rule in that security group in the US East 1 region for port 22, and Lambda just went and fixed it for me, right? So again, my bot went and fixed it, and for those of you disbelievers out there, there it is. All these security groups I created, I created them in a batch, and no rules, they're all gone, right? So the idea here, again, reduce opportunity window for bad people out there. Active enforcement, right? That's what I want to leave with you. All right, so let's get back to my slide. So the last pattern that I'm going to zip through quickly is proactive security, using the DevOps tool chains that you're familiar with, right? A lot of us use a lot of this stuff. Jenkins, GitHub, Rundeck, et cetera, Splunk, Elk stacks, all that cool stuff that makes up my deployment tool chain, my DevOps tool chain. We actually have a customer up in the Bay Area that has integrated evident.io as part of their actual automated test suite. So if, for example, I go do A/B deployments, red, black, as Netflix calls them, if you're familiar with some of you've been to some of their sessions, right? Some of those deployment mechanisms where I go and basically take the next version of my application stack, go deploy it, and I go put it behind a bunch of load ELBs and that kind of stuff, and then I go do the Route 53 switchover. That's very familiar sort of operations for a lot of people, right? I integrate testing of that environment using evident.io as part of my continuous integration and continuous delivery model, right? So now I can run an infrastructure test. If it passes, then I go and make that next step, which basically cuts over to that B deployment. If not, then I reject that change, right? So I don't go through the process. So here I'm actually taking steps to be proactive about my security. Before it's a problem, I go and test it because as DevOps folks, we're testing our deployments, right? We're testing whether that new deployment is returning 5.0, 5.0 whatever, 500s, right? Is it doing the right thing? Is it not, right? So I propose that security tests can be part of your proactive, continuous delivery pipeline, right? It should be part of it. So reject if insecure, approve if secure. Very simple, right? And so there's the example. Again, the slides will be available, so you can go read about on what JobVite has done. A really good customer of ours, and what they've done there. So, what are the things to take away? Number one, don't wait for security to come to you. Go and chase it. If you're the security person, you're already doing that. Conversely, go talk, if you're a security person, go talk to your DevOps people, because you want to automate your security behaviors, right? You want to learn from your DevOps folks, security person, how to go automate more in security. And you want to be the person that affects change in your environment, right? You want to be that person that goes and blurs the line because you're a trailblazer and you're awesome, right? Champion the marriage of DevOps and security. Be that person, right? That person that actually converges the two worlds. A few additional resources, and I want to say thank you very much. Appreciate your time tonight. We're hiring, so if you are interested, come and talk to me. So thank you.
My client has a VPC policy, which is like in their QA in the dev environment, they have one or two VPC inside. You create a large subnet, right? Then when we deploy the application, the dev operator guys say my cloud formation basically create a brand new VPC. Then I'll create a brand new subnet. So my application EC2 instance, RDS instance containing the newly created VPC and the subnet. But my dev operator guys say, because we have this existing VPC and the existing subnet, they recommend me to change my cloud formation, never ever using newly created VPC. But from my experience, my cloud formation is always delayed, changing. So I feel I disagree. Like I need in the QA in the dev environment, should still allow me to create a segregated VPC rather reuse the VPC, because as application coexisting that VPC and the subnet. So I just do this for last 3 months. Those guys day by day doing all this kind of dev operation. So I feel very tough to convince them, like take my approach. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, I could definitely talk a little bit about sort of from a practice perspective. I mean, I'm a huge fan from a security perspective of isolating environments from each other, right, as much as possible. Sure, you can employ, I gave an example earlier about, strong tagging policy in your environment where you can use resource tags to sort of call out resources that are your dev resources, your staging resources, prod resources, et cetera. But at the end of the day, right, you get the capability from an AWS perspective. You can create multiple VPCs for those environments, separate environments. So that's what I would consider network isolation of your resources. You could even go a step further, and if you want to also isolate your identity resources, basically you want to keep these sets of users, your dev users, literally away from your production environment. You can run them in multiple AWS accounts too, right? And again, it kind of goes to what I was talking a little bit about, identity federation. So you can use Active Directory groups or LDAP groups to sort of control access to your AWS accounts. But the idea there is that you get another level of isolation, which is namespace isolation, right? Basically user namespace isolation, right? Where in a separate VPC environment you get network isolation, and on that side it's a little bit more stringent. Now you get Neeraj, who's a developer, can't do in effect my resources in the prod account, for example, right? So that's account to account isolation.
I've seen practice of having a separate account, like a sandbox account, where you can kind of play, developers can do the things like you're mentioning. But it might be, there might be a little bit of tension, right? If you're creating new VPC and you have some kind of hybrid deployment, you need the connectivity back to the on-prem. Then you have other people who need to worry about how to get you plugged in, right? Whether it's Direct Connect or the VPN. So those cases I can see, there's a little bit of tension, right, going on, whether it'll give you the free reign on, creating new VPC or not. But usually a sandbox account, like John mentioned, is a great idea.
Everything from a security perspective seems proactive, but is there a way to not allow it to even happen, like 420Ps opening up or whatever? Like, before it even happens. Like even like your agents, they're like 5 minutes after the fact, but not allowing certain things to happen before they even happen.
That's an interesting scenario, right? So you're like, we don't want to be just in the detection world and then reacting to that. We want to just stop it, right? That's a difficult scenario, right? You want to reach that utopia that your system lives in a constant state, right? And it never changes. That's, so you have perfect controls in place that people can't break into and get through that. I'm not sure, apart from doing the right kind of control environment, but I would recommend it's really important that visibility and auditability, because once you reach a state, that state's going to change, so you want to keep track of it, right? You got to build a solid fortress, but you got to have the people, the cameras around it, and watching what's going on. It's really hard. Security that way is.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's basically my recommendation there. Again, I said how much of a fan I was of templated deployment environments. CloudFormation, Terraform, et cetera, right? Basically get into the habit of defining your infrastructure. And, again, infrastructure is code, right? So define your infrastructure beforehand. It's probably about the best you could do. Have strong policies. Again, I talked about having those very, very well-defined IAM policies for your IAM resources, your entities. What can this role do? What can this IAM user do, et cetera, right? So have very well-defined, because, again, that's about as good as you can do in preventing those types of activities, right? And that's why, again, like what Neeraj is saying, you're not going to, even in that scenario where you have everything well-defined, everything is, controlled through automation and all that stuff, you still have the human factor, right? I can't automate humans. I wish I could, right? But I cannot automate humans. So if somebody has enough privilege to, again, even though you've defined your security groups in a template, if somebody has enough privilege to go and change the security grouping risk rule, it could happen, right? So your best defense there, again, your best offense is a good defense, right? It's having those, those monitoring capabilities, the alerting capabilities, the auto remediation capabilities at your disposal.
What's the recommended pattern for setting public key in the bastion host?
The question was, what's the recommended pattern for getting public keys into the bastion host?
You can, that's a good one, actually.
So I actually have something here. This topic actually came up today in a conversation. Bastion hosts should be islands on their own. I feel strongly about that. So I don't want to extend AD to a bastion host. I don't want to extend LDAP to a bastion host. So what we were thinking is something tried and true. Lots of you have probably done this before. Use Puppet. Use Puppet to roll out keys, because the reality is the community that's going to get onto your bastion host should be fairly small and manageable. So you leverage Puppet. That means that if you're doing that well, you can also limit the number of people that have sudo access to your instance as well. It's a pull, so you can actually do it where you can have it, and your host can pull from Puppet. You don't have people pushing to the machine. That's one solution. I guess there's probably many that you could have. That's just one we were speaking about today.
Yeah, also look into EC2 run command. I think we just recently launched the ability to remotely run executables on the once you kind of just take the ID of an instance. I'll double check on that and I'll get back to you if you want to leave your information.